Welcome to Thread of Terror. We bring you the creepiest stories from Reddit. Dim the lights, grab a blanket, and hit subscribe so you never miss a scare. What is your scariest true story? Story 1. Hiding in plain sight.
When I was about 4 or 5 years old, my parents had just separated. My mum was living in a 2-bedroom apartment. I had my own room, but I preferred to sleep in her bed whenever I stayed with her. The 2 bedrooms were at the end of a hallway, directly across from each other. Our apartment was on the first floor, and I remember it was the middle of summer. My mum had a window open in her room, which was directly behind the bed, above the headboard. One night, I woke up and remember sitting up in bed. I saw that our cat was sitting in the door frame of my mum's room. Her door was open, so I could partially see into my bedroom. This was strange because our cat was usually always in bed with us. As I watched, the cat walked into my bedroom and meowed. I turned to face my mum and tried to wake her up. In the 3 or 4 seconds it took for her to wake up and ask what was wrong, we both looked back toward the door frame. And there was a man standing by my open door, making his way out of my bedroom. I still don't know how she did it so quickly, but my mom immediately picked me up and literally threw me out of the screen window. Again, we were on the first floor, so it was maybe a 3-foot drop to the ground. She quickly followed me, and we started screaming for help. Someone called 911. When the police arrived, they didn't find any signs of forced entry. The only thing they noticed was that our front door was unlocked, which led them to believe the man must have exited that way. The strange thing was, my mum swore she had locked the door that night using the deadbolt and chain lock. About a week later, while cleaning the kitchen, she opened our water heater closet and found a notebook with names and drawings, as well as a pair of gloves and some gum wrappers. The police were called again, but all they could do was speculate that the man had been hiding in our house until we fell asleep.
Story 2. Creepy rocking chair.
My uncle is a pastor at a church in Oklahoma, and one of his closest friends, a youth minister at a neighboring town's church, experienced something that still gives me chills. This youth minister is a family man with a wife and a young daughter. Back when his daughter was about 5 or 6 years old, she and her mother had a Saturday morning tradition. They would wake up early together and prepare breakfast. It was their little routine, and something the daughter really cherished. One Saturday morning, however, something unusual happened. The daughter was still in bed when she heard the sound of pots and pans clattering in the kitchen, and she saw the faint glow of the kitchen light spilling into the hallway. Thinking her mother had started breakfast without her, she got up and went to check. But when she entered the kitchen, everything was dark. The lights were off, and the room was completely empty. Confused, she headed to her parents' bedroom and asked her mother, "Mommy, why did you start breakfast without me?" Her mother, equally puzzled, replied that she had not even gotten out of bed yet and thought she had heard the daughter in the kitchen making noise. Alarmed, she woke up her husband, worried that someone might be in the house. Grabbing an old aluminum baseball bat for protection, he cautiously made his way into the darkened home. When he got to the kitchen, he noticed that some pots and pans had indeed been moved, but nothing else seemed out of place. Just next to the kitchen was a cozy reading room with a couch and a rocking chair. As he stepped into the room, His eyes caught movement in the shadows. He froze. The rocking chair in the corner was moving. Not a gentle sway, but a rapid back and forth motion, as if someone invisible was rocking it furiously. Chilled to his core, he instinctively stepped back, gripping the bat tightly. Then, noticing a Bible on the nearby shelf, he grabbed it, held it up, and shouted with all the authority he could muster, "In the name of Jesus, leave my house." To his astonishment, the rocking chair came to an immediate halt. It did not creak to a stop. It just froze, as though whatever force had been moving it suddenly vanished. He stood there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened, before carefully returning to his wife and daughter. Thankfully, nothing like that ever happened in their home again. Even as someone who does not believe in the supernatural, I cannot help but get goosebumps every time I think about this story. Whether it was a demonic presence, an unexplained phenomenon, or just the power of suggestion, it remains one of the creepiest stories I have ever heard.
Story 3. Who was at the door?
This happened in the late 1980s or early 1990s, and I was around 6 or 7 years old. I was at home with my sister, who was 14 or 15 at the time. We grew up in a small town in Texas where everyone knew everyone. On this particular night, we were home alone, and my parents let my sister babysit me frequently. We always got along well due to our age gap. It was about 8 p.m. during the winter, so it was already dark. We were in the common room since that was where the television was. We were watching shows like 60 Minutes, 48 Hours, or Hard Copy. Those hour-long news segments that delve deep into large crimes, like trafficking, murders, and kidnappings. This particular episode was about a quiet man who went on a rampage at his neighbor's house, mutilating them and kidnapping their young daughter. Now, the thing about our common room was that the door leading to the backyard was a large glass door on a wall of floor-to-ceiling windows. Beyond the door was just complete darkness unless you turned on the backyard light, which we hadn't. The front door was on the other side of the room with a small entryway. It was a solid door, so you couldn't see beyond it, but there was a glass storm door on the outside. About 45 minutes into the show, as they were talking about the ongoing manhunt for this crazy guy, suddenly, bam, bam, the front door banged loudly. We jumped up and screamed. Dead silence followed. The only lights on in the house were from the kitchen down the hall and the television. We started thinking maybe something on the porch, like the planters or a rocking chair, had blown against the door. We were in West Texas, and crazy strong winds are common there. After a minute or two of silence, we started to relax. But then we heard the storm door on the outside of our front door close. Someone had to have opened that door to bang on the front door like that. We froze in the middle of the room where we had been watching TV. My sister crawled over to the television and turned it off. It was an old TV, so you had to turn a metal dial to switch it off, which made a mildly loud thunk sound. Now we were just sitting in the room, dimly lit by the kitchen light. I don't remember exactly how much time passed, but I remember we kept making eye contact and then looking at the front door. I was sitting on my knees with my feet tucked under me, and when I turned around to look at the back wall of windows and the glass door, we heard, and I saw the back doorknob turn. It was locked by the knob, but not dead-bolted. The handle rattled slightly, as if someone was gently trying to open it. Neither of us made a sound, we were just holding our breath. Then, bam, 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 someone was trying to force the door open, jerking it back and forth. The whole wall of windows was vibrating violently, and with each jerk of the door, I could see my faint reflection going fuzzy, then clear, then fuzzy again. At that point, my sister screamed in panic. I was still frozen on the floor. She quickly got up, grabbed me, and dragged me into her bedroom. She slammed the door shut and threw her mattress and anything she could in front of it. Thankfully, she remembered the phone, one of those heavy beige plastic portable phones with a long metal antenna. We still had to dial the sheriff directly, but in her panic, she didn't remember the number. Instead, she hit redial, and it was one of her friends who picked up. She told them, in short, gasping breaths, that someone was trying to get into the house and that they needed to come over immediately. I was curled up on the floor, shaking uncontrollably. We didn't hear anything else until we saw the headlights of my sister's friend and her parents driving up to the house. We never found out who was at the door or why they were there. There were no signs of anything happening, just a couple of scuff marks on the bottom of the back door, which we weren't sure if they had been there before or not. Nothing like that ever happened to us again, but for sure we never forgot to lock a door after that night.
Story 4. Haunted babysitting job.
When I was about 16 years old, I took a summer babysitting job caring for 2 girls, Monday through Friday, while their parents worked. I would arrive at their house early in the morning, around 6 a.m., as their mother prepared to leave for work. The girls typically slept until about 10 a.m., so I would spend the early hours watching television in the living room downstairs until they woke up. At first, the strange occurrences were subtle. Occasionally, I would feel as though someone was standing behind me in the kitchen or at the staircase. Thinking it might be one of the girls trying to play a prank, I would get up, walk through the kitchen, and slowly creep upstairs, hoping to catch them in the act. However, I never found anyone. This happened at least twice a week, and every time the girls were still in their rooms, sound asleep. One morning, while I was watching television, the channels began flipping on their own. I assumed I was sitting on the remote and started searching for it in the couch cushions. However, I quickly realized the remote was sitting untouched on the coffee table, nowhere near me. Even more unsettling, the channels were not changing in numerical order. Instead, they jumped erratically, channel 12, then 34, back to 3, and so on, almost as if someone was selecting them manually. Alarmed, I ran to the stairs to check if one of the girls was behind this, but once again, no one was there, and the girls were still in their rooms. The incident that finally compelled me to tell their mother about these odd occurrences happened one morning when she asked me to help prepare for her daughter's birthday by inflating some balloons. She gave me a pump to blow up the balloons, and I began working on them in the kitchen. Midway through, I got thirsty, so I set the pump on the counter next to the refrigerator and went to grab a drink. When I shut the refrigerator door, the pump suddenly flew off the counter and rolled into the living room. At first, I tried to rationalize what had happened. I assumed I must have closed the fridge door too hard, causing the pump to fall. To test this theory, I placed the pump back on the counter and closed the fridge door with the same force. The pump did not move. I tried again, this time shutting the door harder, but still it stayed in place. After several attempts adjusting both the pump's position and the door's force, I realized there was no logical explanation for how it had flown into the living room. That evening, I shared the experiences with their mother. She became very quiet before admitting, "It has been happening to you too." I was stunned. She went on to tell me that the television had also been changing channels on its own for her, and that her daughters occasionally mentioned seeing children playing in the backyard who were not actually there. She had told the girls not to say anything to me because she did not want to risk losing another babysitter.
Story 5. Haunted by a little girl.
When I met my best friend Matt, he was one of those kids longing for an unnecessary amount of attention. He was a scene kid, spiked his hair, and constantly talked about obscurely heavy music. When he started telling me these strange ghost stories, I dismissed them, thinking he was just seeking attention. I never really believed him, and I am sure he knew that. He stopped sharing them, and I kind of forgot about them until recently. About 5 months ago, I spent 2 nights at his place. I had never had any first-hand supernatural experiences until this night. We were going through the usual teenager routine, raiding the kitchen for snacks, grabbing a ton of Mountain Dew drinks, and heading upstairs for hours of video games. His ice machine was not working on his refrigerator, but he had a separate one in his laundry room. I walked over there ready to grab some ice, and when I entered, I heard a noise from the ceiling. It was not incredibly creepy, but it was noticeable enough to make me think, what was that? If I remember correctly, it sounded like kind of a knocking sound. After the whole thing, I literally checked the walls and ceiling of his laundry room to see if anything could have made that noise. I could not find anything. It was a very empty laundry room, empty cabinets, a washing machine, a dryer, an ice maker, and an empty fish tank. Matt followed me there, and he was right behind me when I heard the noise. I turned around, looked at him with a horrified face and asked, "You heard that too, right?" He calmly said, "Yep, let us go." We went upstairs, and he started unloading all these stories on me. Before he moved to Florida, where he met me, he lived in an old house in Georgia. As a kid, he remembered seeing a little girl around his house. He would often have simple conversations with her. She did not seem to mean him any harm. His mom, Lisa, even confirmed his story by sharing an incident involving his toy RC car from when he was very young. Apparently, he did not remember this. One day, Lisa was making dinner while Matt sat at the table. They both heard the RC car moving upstairs. Lisa had been divorced for a year at the time, and Matt was an only child. She went upstairs, turned off the RC car, and went back downstairs. 10 or 20 minutes later, the car started moving again. Lisa went back upstairs, took the batteries out, and placed the toy on a high shelf. Another 10 or 20 minutes passed, and they heard a loud bang. The toy had fallen from the shelf onto the wooden floor, even though the shelf was wide enough that it should not have simply fallen. Matt and Lisa believed the little girl was a playful spirit. Her actions seemed odd but not menacing. He also spent a few years in Costa Rica, where he experienced more strange occurrences. He mentioned that houses there often have courtyards due to the abundance of land. One night, while outside smoking, he heard relentless noises coming from the southern part of the courtyard. Suddenly he heard a quick whisper behind him saying something like, "Go to sleep now, you will be fine." The eerie part was that he recognized the voice. It seemed to be the same little girl he saw in Georgia. To my surprise, he listened to her and went to bed. Fast forward to my sleepover. I noticed claw marks on his bed sheets, two large rips that looked like someone made them while holding up a peace sign. Matt brushed it off, saying it was nothing to worry about. Later that night, while I was alone in his brother's empty bed, I saw a tiny light draw a triangle on the TV screen twice. Before I could process what was happening, a Nerf dart rolled smoothly from under the bed to my feet. Startled, I went back to Matt's room and told him everything. Matt believes the little girl is a playful spirit, possibly a guardian angel, who has always protected him. While they have no explanation for the claw marks, they doubt the girl is responsible, as she has only ever been protective.
Story 6. My son knew things.
My mother-in-law was a very funny and cool woman. She and my wife were very close, and sadly, she passed away when our son was about 4 months old. Fast forward a few years, and we were living in an old 1930s-era craftsman house in Pasadena, California. Our son was about 3 at the time. One night, I was giving him a bath when he suddenly started looking over my shoulder, not at random things, but at something specific. After a moment, he asked me why Grandma called Mummy a funny name. I was taken aback and asked him what he meant, thinking he was talking about my mum. He then said, "Why does Grandma call Mummy? Insert my mother-in-law's nickname for my wife." I was really surprised, because my wife and I never used that nickname. It was something my mother-in-law had called her since she was a baby. I asked him where he had heard that, and his reply was, "The farmer told me." Confused, I asked him who the farmer was, and he replied, "His friend." I later told my wife this story, and she was understandably moved to tears over the whole nickname thing. We both knew there was no way he could have known that. We just marveled at it, unsure what to make of it. The next weekend, I was at home with our son while my wife was at work. I heard him talking in his room as though he were having a conversation. He was saying things like, "Yes, no, I don't know that," followed by some laughing. I went into his room and asked him what he was doing. He said he was playing. I asked with whom, and he replied, "The farmer." At this point, I started feeling pretty unsettled, as I couldn't shake the feeling that it felt like something from a horror movie. I asked him where the farmer was, and he said, "He left when you came in." A few days later, in the middle of the night, my wife and I both overheard our son saying the following: "Grandma says you and I can't be friends anymore." We rushed to check on him, both feeling a little freaked out. He was sitting up in bed. I asked if he was okay, and he replied, "Yeah, Grandma says I can't play with the farmer anymore." From that moment on, he never mentioned the farmer again. He's 13 now and doesn't remember any of it, but my wife and I still do.
Story 7. Fear of the basement.
When I was a kid, the thing I hated doing the most was taking my clothes downstairs to the basement and placing them in a big pile next to the laundry machine. so that my mom would wash them. That side of the basement was not finished, and it really terrified me. I had so many nightmares about that place, reoccurring nightmares that I would realize were happening but couldn't escape. One of the nightmares was that I would be walking around the house with no one else home, and then I would become aware that it was approaching the time. I don't know what time it was, but I could feel it in my bones that something terrible was about to happen. So I would crawl under the kitchen table. The door to the basement was in the kitchen, and then the basement door would open, and I could see the legs of a man. I never knew who he was, and I never saw his face, but I knew that if this creature caught me out in the open, it would do horrible things to me. The worst part was the thought that it knew I was under the table and enjoyed the fact that I was so scared hiding there, trying not to be seen or heard. Sometimes, at the end of an unrelated dream, or sometimes just on its own, I'd be walking down the stairs into the basement. When I stepped off the last step, I would be plunged into total darkness, and something would grab me. I can't explain the terror this produced in me, and the worst part was knowing, at the top of the stairs, what was going to happen. I couldn't stop myself from walking down. There were other crazy dreams like that, all revolving around the basement, or the idea of the basement. I hated the basement. One day when I had to take my laundry down, I was home alone except for my dog. So I decided it would be better to have her down there with me than to go by myself. I grabbed my laundry, called the dog, and headed down the stairs. It was daylight, and light was streaming down the stairs and into the basement through small slit windows. Nothing seemed that terrifying. I casually tossed my clothes onto the pile next to the washing machine and started making my way back up the stairs. Even though I had gained a little boldness, I always ran up the stairs because I hated the basement. I was a scrawny kid, so you could barely hear my feet tapping up the stairs. Suddenly, all I could hear was this insane thudding and scrambling coming up the stairs behind me. My brain almost literally shut down. I screamed with terror, felt my heart pounding in my chest, and couldn't even continue moving up the stairs. I simply fell onto the stairs and curled into a ball. Can you imagine growing up being told monsters aren't real, and then facing the moment where your worst nightmare is about to harm you in your own home? I shut my eyes as tight as I could and waited for what felt like death. Then my dog started licking my face, excited to be playing a fun new game called Race You Up the Stairs.
Story 8. The Entity in the Mirror.
I have had a few paranormal events occur throughout my life, and most of them were pretty tame. But there is one incident that really affected me, and it still sticks with me today. About 4 years ago, I was finishing my freshman year of college. I had been living in the dorms with an amazing roommate, and overall, I had a great experience. However, towards the end of my last semester, something started to feel different in our dorm hall. We were all still our usual lively selves, but there was this overwhelming feeling of dread whenever we walked into the dorms. We all wrote it off as just the stress of finals approaching, but it didn't feel right. One night, after studying, I decided to hit the shower so I could wake myself up and get ready for class in a few hours. Before I continue, let me describe the layout of our hall and the bathroom. Our hall was one of many halls on a single floor, and each hall had 4 rooms that accommodated 2 people each, or a single room for the resident assistant. The entrance to the halls were massive steel doors with a small window located at one end, and across from it was the bathroom. The hallway honestly felt more like a prison block than a living space for college students. As for the bathroom itself, when you walked in, you were immediately met with 2 sets of sinks, 2 sinks on each side, on your left and right, with huge mirrors facing each other, creating an infinite reflection. Beyond that were 2 urinals and a toilet stall on the left side, and 2 showers on the right side. When facing the left set of sinks, you could clearly see into the showers from the mirror if the doors were open. In the right set of sinks, you could see the reflection of the showers. The bathroom door was identical to the entrance to the hall, a massive steel frame with a small window that didn't allow for much of a view, and with good reason. The door was propped open with a giant wooden wedge that couldn't be moved unless you were really trying to close it. Now, back to the story. I was all alone in the bathroom, getting ready to take a shower. I threw my change of clothes on the right sink so I could reach around the stall to grab them. As I set my stuff down, I happened to glance up into the mirror, and I saw something almost shimmering inside the shower stall. As I looked at it, I noticed it slowly getting closer, almost like it was jumping from one layer of reflection to the next. I was unsettled, but I didn't think much of it at first, assuming it was just me coming down from a massive Red Bull, Adderall, and caffeine kick. However, it kept transitioning faster. As it got closer, I started making out more details, but nothing vivid or clear. Just a dark mass that looked like it was covered in hair. At this point, I was completely freaking out, since the thing was getting closer in the mirror, and I was frozen in place. As it reached the 4th layer of reflection, I got the closest look at it I'd ever get, and I regret every moment of it. It wasn't hair. It was some kind of long, flowing veil. You could see through it partially, but from the torso down it was solid black. The face was human, but so far removed I can't even describe it. There were eyes, which were black but somehow glowing. I only saw this for a second at the most, but it's burned into my mind forever. Then, suddenly the lights cut out, and I heard the door slam shut. It was pitch black in the bathroom, and I couldn't see the thing anymore. I tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. Then, out of nowhere, I was hit with an intense smell of blood, and that's the last thing I remember. I woke up later in the hospital. My resident assistant claimed he was on his way to use the bathroom sometime after the incident and found me in the shower stall with my shirt covered in blood from a massive nosebleed. He tried asking me what had happened, and according to him, the only thing I could respond with was, "It saw me." I started freaking out, so he called an ambulance, and they got me to the hospital. The entire time I apparently kept freaking out, so they sedated me to calm me down. I started to come around just as my parents showed up, worried sick. I asked the doctors what had happened, and they said they believed I had a seizure. However, after running a CT scan, as I was cooperative enough, they found no signs of a seizure. Moreover, epilepsy doesn't run in my family. I had taken Adderall countless times before, and after that incident, and I've never had a similar side effect, neither hallucinations nor potential seizures. To this day, I can't bring myself to look into a mirror for more than a minute, and being stuck in a room with one for an extended period makes me break down. I've been in therapy for 3 years because of this, and I've talked to countless religious leaders. Unfortunately, most of them gave me the general turn to God in times like these advice, but none of them recognized this pattern as anything demonic or evil. The strangest thing is, before that incident, there were no other claims of paranormal activity in the dorms, and since I left, there haven't been any either. It was just that one isolated incident.
Story 9. The Ouija board incident.
This story didn't happen to me, but to my mom when she was a teenager. My mom is now in her mid-60s. She's not an overly religious woman. She doesn't read the Bible regularly, rarely goes to church, but she prays every night because that's what gives her comfort. I should mention I would occasionally watch regular horror movies with her, nothing too crazy or gory, but spooky stuff. One day I asked her if she wanted to watch The Exorcist with me, and she flat out refused. She said there's absolutely no way she will ever watch anything related to possession or exorcisms. I found this curious. Then, when the movie Constantine came out, I showed her the trailer and asked if she wanted to watch it. As soon as she saw the scene with the girl climbing the ceiling, she refused again. Another thing to note is that my mum absolutely refuses to let anyone bring a Ouija board into her house. She'll yell, scream, and curse until you drop the subject entirely. This is important. Now that the backstory is out of the way, I asked her why exactly she refuses to watch these kinds of movies. She told me that when she was a teenager, she went to a sleepover at a friend's house. The parents were watching TV and my mom and her friends were sitting on the floor playing a board game. A game my mom had never played before. It turned out to be a Ouija board, and she had no idea what it was or what it did. They began asking a bunch of questions and discovered that there was a spirit in the house. They asked it to show itself. Nothing happened, so they demanded it show itself. This was my mom's first indication that something wasn't right. Suddenly, the lights in every room of the house went out, including the TV, and then they all snapped back on. It was spooky, but they shrugged it off as a fluke. They asked the next question, "Who are you?" The pointer on the board started moving in big circles under their hands and stopped at the letter D, then E, then V, I, L. They thought someone must have been messing with it. This couldn't be real. So they asked, "If you are the devil, then show yourself." Nothing happened for a while, and then the TV went out. When they looked into the reflection in the TV sitting in the living room, my mom, her friends, and even their parents could make out the shape of something sitting next to them, something terrifying. The house grew extremely cold. Suddenly, loud noises came from the kitchen. Items flew off the top of the refrigerator, and the cupboards began opening and closing. The group immediately stopped the game, packed it up, and threw it in the trash, swearing never to play again. Later that night, my mom was sound asleep when she was awoken by loud clanging noises on the roof. She listened intently and could hear what sounded like chains and dogs walking on the roof. It seemed impossible, so she tried to convince herself it must have been outside somewhere. The next morning, she talked to her friend's parents and asked them if any of their neighbors had dogs. They told her no, and they also admitted they had heard the sounds of chains and dogs on the roof the previous night. That's the story of why my mum refuses to watch anything related to exorcisms or possession. She truly believes the devil was there with them that night, sitting next to them. The creepy part is, every time she tells me this story, I get a cold shiver down my spine because there's no way she's making this up.
Story 10. The doorknob that turned by itself.
For some reason, my grandparents always seemed to move into houses that were haunted. The houses weren't really creepy, but there would always be strange, paranormal events that happened. To keep this story brief, I can share more if you'd like to hear them, but here's my experience. It was summer vacation, and I was around 13 or 14 years old. At that age, I would often stay up late, eating junk food and playing video games. Because of this, I could hear the vibrations of anybody walking down the hallway. I was at the end of the hallway, across from my grandparents' room, so if I heard someone walking, it would usually be my grandpa getting some antacid tablet. It was a recognizable pattern, the sound of feet hitting the carpet as it made its way down the hall to the antacid cupboard, and then back to the bedroom. The sound would be finished off with hearing my grandpa close his bedroom door. But then I started to notice something. Randomly throughout the night, I would hear these footsteps. If it was any later than 1 a.m., I would open the door and there would be nobody in the hallway. Staying rational, I assumed my grandpa had just gotten inside his bedroom before I saw him. So, when hearing the footsteps, I would wait until they were at the other end of the hall, where the cupboard with the antacids was, and then open the door. Nothing. It was as dark as could be. I got used to the sounds since they weren't too loud or anything. It was just footsteps on the carpet, and I figured I was just hearing things half the time. One night, I was lying in bed watching television. The head of my bed shared the same wall as my bedroom door. One night, I heard the footsteps again, and as usual, they made their way down the hall. Then they came toward my end of the hallway. I was used to this by now and usually just ignored it. It could have been my grandpa, or maybe just the ghost. But then, the footsteps stopped, and my doorknob made a crazy clacking sound, as if someone was rapidly turning the doorknob without actually opening it. I jumped out of bed, ran to my door, and tried to catch whatever it was my grandpa could be messing with me. But there was nothing. It was as dark and quiet as could be. I slowly opened my grandparents' door and was greeted with the sound of them snoring. Good night.
Story 11. Unsettling discoveries.
I have 2 stories to share. The first takes place when I was younger, living in an apartment complex where my mother worked as the manager. The day before Halloween, she told us a scary story about how 2 little boys and their mother died in the vacant apartment above us. She said that if you listened carefully, you could still hear their footsteps running up and down the hallway. At that exact moment, what do we hear? The sound of running footsteps from upstairs. The look on my mother's face was pure terror, so she immediately called the local police officer who patrolled the neighborhood and one of the on-duty maintenance staff. They went into the apartment to investigate. It turned out that A homeless mother had slipped in through an open window with her 2 children and had been living there for some time. After that experience, my mother never told another ghost story again. The second story took place in a different apartment complex that my mother managed. I was a bit older by this point. One day she was going through vacant apartments to check if anything needed to be fixed or replaced before showing them to potential tenants. I went with her because there were no maintenance workers available that day. We checked a few apartments and everything seemed normal. Then we arrived at one apartment where the door just opened on its own. No need to turn the doorknob. The lock was broken, and at first, I chalked it up to neighborhood kids messing around. I stood in the living room area, looking out the window, while my mother went into the master bedroom. Suddenly I heard her scream. I sprinted to the bedroom as fast as I could, and when I arrived I saw a girl in the closet, pale as snow, half naked with her nails dug into the wall. My mother told me to go get help, so I ran to the main office to find the security guard. As I was heading there, I saw a man, about 6 feet 3 inches, running out of the kitchen where I had been standing moments earlier. I chased him for about 400 to 500 feet before I lost sight of him. It turned out that the girl was in the middle of being sexually assaulted when we walked in.
Story 12. Demon Visited.
I posted this a while back, but what the hell? It was fucking scary. I was with my boyfriend at the time. We were laying in my bed and the lights were out. We weren't talking, just both thinking. All of a sudden he rolls over and hugs me really tightly. I, of course, hug him back, but then this feeling just hit me. If I wasn't already laying down, it would have knocked me over. It was a total feeling of dread and panic. I'll admit, I have had panic attacks in the past, but this was not the same. I hugged my boyfriend back as hard as I could. I never felt a feeling like this before. My boyfriend is one of those people who always is really warm, but even in his arms I felt ice cold. I could feel this evil, awful feeling, and it seemed like it was coming from the corner of my room. It was kind of like sensing your friend behind you when they aren't saying anything. I honestly believe there was a demon or something in my room. I got the courage to speak and I said, "Jay, do you feel that?" And he said he did. The cold, evil feeling. This all happened in about 30 seconds to a minute. He decided to call his friend who was studying to be a youth pastor. I got up and turned the lights on and came back to the bed. He called Matt and put him on speakerphone. Matt prayed for us and we both closed our eyes and listened, praying in our heads. When the prayer was done, the room felt lighter and it wasn't cold anymore. But after a little small talk afterwards, Matt asked, "Were you two talking while I was praying?" We were like, "Of course not. We were just listening." He said he heard from the phone, a deep, gravelly voice telling him to stop. And he said he felt an awful, evil feeling overcome him while he was praying. Fucking freaked me out. Boyfriend drove home immediately afterwards because he was super freaked out. I was kind of mad he wouldn't stay with me because I was scared too. I went in my dad's room to tell him I thought there a demon came into my room. He was sleeping though, and just muttered something about having a gun and he'd shoot it. Thanks, Dad. So yes, I am convinced it was a demon, but it never came back, so why the fuck did it come? That's the only problem I have with the whole thing. What was it trying to accomplish? I don't think I'll ever know.
Thanks for joining us on this terrifying adventure. If tonight's story gave you chills, let us know in the comments below and share your own scary experiences too. Don't forget to leave a like if you want more nightmares and subscribe if you haven't already. Until next time, sleep tight and remember, not all shadows are empty.